This video is part 2 of my new 1903-ish Edwardian gown. In this part, I'm making the skirts of the gown, and part 3 will be the making of the bodice. Part 1, which I will link to in the video description, is about me making the petticoat to go under this gown, as well as creating a pattern for both the petticoat and the skirt. If you're interested in that process, I would recommend watching that one first, as I talk a lot about creating and fitting the pattern, which I won't discuss much in this video. As a reminder, this dress is based off the 1903 to 1907 dress shown in Costume in Detail by Nancy Bradfield. I'm starting everything off by dressing my mannequin in the corset, bustle pad, and petticoat that I plan to wear with this outfit, so I can test out the design of my new skirt. It's always best to fit everything over the actual undergarments you're going to be wearing so you can get a more precise and exact fit. My corset is an S-bend corset from Red Threaded, which I will also link to down below. I'm making the test skirt out of a muslin fabric. I'm using my original pattern for the petticoat, and I'm just adding a touch of extra width along the hips so I have a little bit more room to work with. I'm also adding a generous amount of length to the bottom of the side and back pattern pieces so I can create a train for this gown. I'm just guessing here on how much to add, and we'll just see if it works out. Then I just pinned the pattern pieces together securely so I can test the fit of this pattern. All right, I have draft 1 of the new flared skirt on my dress form. It's pretty good, but I think I want a little bit more volume, particularly in this side flare. I think that I want this to come out a little bit more here. You can see that I messed up lining up the side and side back pieces, so it should have a little bit more just to get the pattern, but I think I want it to come out even more. I think I'm okay with the length of the back piece. I think that is a decent silhouette, particularly if you think about how it's going to be really filled out because of all the ruffles that are on it. The ruffles will start about right here, I think. So there's going to be some nice fullness, but I think I want this front part to flare out just a touch more right here. So I'm just going to pin on a few strips of fabric just to see how that's going to look, and then I'll go from there. Okay, here is my updated silhouette. I'm gonna smooth this bottom line some. This is obviously just really messily pinned together with all this extra stuff that I added in, but I'm gonna smooth that out. And that just gives it a little bit more flare at the sides. So it has this really pretty sweepy silhouette here. All right, now it's time to finally cut out the fashion fabric. This is a beautiful, lightweight cotton that has woven sheer stripes in the fabric as well as raised spots. It has a really delightful texture, and all of the stripes echo the insertion lace that was so common in this era without any of the extra work. I found this fabric randomly in a Facebook group, and it's one of my favorite fabrics ever. I'm so excited to finally be using it. The only downside of this fabric is that it is a little bit wobbly, so I'm taking extra care to finish the skirt with French seams so it doesn't fall apart when I wear it. All right, so here is the first fitting of the actual skirt of the dress. I just have it sewn up along the side seams and up the back. I have the side left open currently because that is where the placket is going to be to close this, so it'll close at the side there. I actually should not have sewn up the back. This is kind of dumb because I will have to unpick this seam so that I can actually put the ruffles on when it's flat. I should have just pinned it closed, but I wasn't thinking, and I just sewed everything up and didn't think about what my next step in the process was. So I will have to very gently unpick the seam. Since this is such a delicate fabric, it's going to be a little bit challenging to unpick it, but I'll have to try to retain as much of it as I can. I'm pretty happy with the length of it. It's obviously not hemmed yet, so I do need to add in the hem. And I really like the amount of train that I've left on it. It's subtle, but it's going to look really pretty with the ruffles that go along it as well. All right, now it's time for me to start on the ruffles of this because I have this skirt made and hemmed. It's still one flat piece. I have not sewn up the back seam, so that'll be easier for me to add the ruffles. One of the things I love the most about this book is that Nancy Bradfield adds in the most critical details, and they're things that you would never even think to ask about or consider unless you were sitting down to make this dress. So she actually gives the dimensions for each individual ruffle, which is so helpful because you don't have to sort of sit there and think, oh wait, like, do they need to be graduated? How wide is the bottom one? So she actually lists out the length of the individual ruffles, which is just incredibly helpful. So as you can see here, she has the bottom ruffle is 4.5 inches, then 3.5 inches, then 3 1/4. So they're a little bit graduated. She also lists where this one is. So this is 28 inches worth of frills on the back, and it's 10.5 inches of frills on the front. So she gives you a good guideline of where you need to start them, and then where the ruffles need to sort of kick up in the back. So I need to now measure how much fabric I need to cut out for the strips to make each one of these individual ruffles. And then it was time to start making ruffles. I made so many ruffles. I'm annoyed at myself that I didn't actually keep track of how many I really made, but it was definitely in the dozens of yards. Each strip had to be cut, hemmed, and then ruffled. Now the way the ruffles get added onto this is really interesting. There are 3 rows of ruffles in the front and 8 rows of ruffles in the back. And that is achieved by adding in an extra layer of ruffles at each seam line so that they begin stacking on top of each other. As you add more and more at each seam, it creates that wonderful sweep of ruffles that grows along the back of this dress. It took me days to make, pin, and sew on all of these ruffles. I felt like it was a never-ending task. It was especially tedious because I had to keep stopping and making more ruffles because I kept running out. Well, annoyingly, on my very last row of ruffles, I have discovered that if I cut this fabric very carefully right down the center of this motif, it actually makes basically a perfect hem. It doesn't unravel here. So I've like spent all this time hemming every little bit of these ruffles, and I could have just done this the whole time. Oh, sigh. I guess at least I remembered on one of them, so saved me a little bit of labor, but oh boy. I'm getting ready to put on my last ruffle. Ah, the last one! God, I'm so sick of making these. I'm glad this is almost over. Sewing on this last ruffle was a real beast. There was so much fabric to try and wrangle and keep even through my sewing machine. This took me a long time. In the end, I also decided to add a self fabric band along the top of the ruffles to give it a nice finish. Hi! So, scene change. Since the last thing I did on this video, it's been about 3.5 weeks. So this poor project has been rather abandoned. But I did something really exciting in the interim, which is that I redid my sewing studio. So the whole first part of this video and the petticoat video were all filmed at my house. because we were under quarantine for coronavirus, so I was working from home. But now that's been lifted somewhat. I mean, we're not going out anymore, but we can at least go to work and things like that because I work alone in my studio. And so we took that time to redo my whole sewing space at my office. There's a whole video about that. I'll link to it down below if you want to see it. And now I have this like completely beautiful, wonderful new sewing studio. So I'm really excited, and this will be the first project that I'm working on here. So it's pretty great. And now let's get back to actually talking about this dress. Why don't we? All right, so I'm nearly finished with it. All I have left to do is I need to finish the placket. I need to put a waistband on it, and I'm also doing some work on the ruffles. Let me show you what it's gonna look like. So because I made this flat, I had to sew up the back seam, which is right here. It's sort of invisible. And that means that I have all these like loose ruffle ends where it went over. So I need to actually join these across. You can see I've done a couple on the bottom already. Basically, I'm just overlapping them and then sewing one side down to the other one. Here's another one here. I mean, I just have them like whip stitched together, if you can see. And I'm just trying to kind of alternate where I put the seam so it doesn't have this like really obvious seam that goes right down the back. So basically what I'm doing now is just trimming these off, turning them under, and then hand sewing them to each other. And then I need to finish off the little band that I put on top. I didn't finish it so I could line it up in the back here. So that's what I'm gonna do right now. All right, the back of this is now all done. I think I've successfully sort of masked the joins, so it's not totally obvious that there are actually seams along each one of these things. Obviously, if you look close, you can see them, but once you step back a little bit, they just kind of blend into the whole ruffle, which is exactly what I was going for. So I have made a design error on this gown that I wanted to point out and talk about. In the original, there's a really sharp difference between the 3 ruffles in the front and the, I think, 9 ruffles in the back. Like there's a very, very large sweep up that makes to that. And it's not the same on my dress. I ended up being about 4 inches short of where these should have ended based on the measurements in the original. And that's actually my own fault, and I know exactly what happened. So in the original garment, the front panel is much narrower, and the seams actually drop down in front of the hips. But I changed this dress to have a single front panel that's much larger, and I put this seam along the hips. And I did that because I don't like when you have a seam along the front of the dress. I think it's distracting, so I intentionally moved that back. But what that meant is that I didn't start curving these pieces here until much further back on the skirt. So in the original, they would have actually started curving up here, which gives it more space and more room to sweep up more. So because I changed the location of this seam, it means I didn't get as much room to make the curve happen here. So I'm a little bit disappointed only because the sharpness of the contrast between the front and the back is actually my single favorite thing about the original dress. But I understand why my choice changed what it ended up looking like in the end. And I have made peace with it. I guess we'll say that. I mean, it's still quite a dramatic change, so I shouldn't be too disappointed. But I just wanted to acknowledge the change that I made and how that impacted the end result of the dress. I'm making the waistband out of the same cotton organdy I used for my petticoat. This is a lightweight but strong fabric, so it makes a great waistband because I won't add much bulk to my waist. This won't be seen, it will be below the bodice, but it gives a strong place for the bodice to anchor to.